Hey, welcome back to another video. This video is going to be on setting up a mail to be sent out when this contact form is submitted. This contact form was actually taken from a previous tutorial that I did, which you can see here. It was made a long time ago, and a lot of people asked me, or quite a few people actually asked me for a tutorial on how to get email set up. So this is what this tutorial is going to be about. Now, the part one, you could call it, of this was with Livewire. You don't need Livewire to follow this tutorial. You could just learn about the Laravel mail stuff and not know anything about Livewire. So if you want to learn how to mail stuff, this is a tutorial for you, I guess. What we're going to do is actually just define an admin email we're going to send submissions to. We're going to figure out how to queue the email and send it out and have it somewhat formatted. We're going to see the email actually get sent in Mailtrap, which I have open here. And then we're actually going to write a couple tests, which you can skip, but I think the test part is probably the most interesting of it all. So I hope you enjoy the tutorial. Before I get started, I just want to mention Cloudways. Cloudways is where I host all my WordPress, Laravel, and even Node stuff. I've been with them for 4 years. They're relatively inexpensive and quite reliable. So if you're looking for a new host, I would highly recommend them. The link is in the description below. It helps out the channel. It helps out you if you're looking for one. If you do end up signing up, please do let me know how it goes. I'm very curious. So the first thing I want to do is actually just run through the project and show you what we have so far. The code is the same as the previous tutorial. All I've done is change one background color just to make it look better. But the basics are still here. It's all the same. So the root route just goes to the contact form component. This is a Livewire thing, but like I said, you don't need to know Livewire. All you need to know is that this function here submits the form and creates the contact here. And right here is where we're going to mail. That's it. So we also should know that there's a contact model. It doesn't have anything in here, but you could see that we migrated this. So a contact has a name, an email, a message, and the timestamps. Pretty standard stuff, not too complicated. It's got no relationships or anything crazy there, so it should be pretty easy to follow this along. So to get started, I think what I'm going to first do is define an administrator email somewhere that we could send to. And I think the best place to put this is in the mail configuration. One thing to note quickly is that we're going to be using mail, Laravel mail, instead of notifications. The reason for this is because notifications is very useful for sending emails out to a model. For example, if you have 100 users in your system and they're all getting billed, and their billing comes up and you want to send them a new invoice, you can use notifications to notify those users. Notifications are also useful if you want to send on multiple channels, not just email. You can also send, I think, Slack, SMS, with a whole bunch of different drivers. In our case, we don't really have users or any kind of model to send to. We just want to send the submissions to an admin email. So what I'm going to do is just show you how to queue actual mailables. So let's go into our mail config. And maybe somewhere at the bottom here, maybe below from, I'm just going to define a notification recipient. I'm going to make this admin@test.com. It's not important because Mailtrap will catch pretty much any email coming out of here. And the way you set that up in Mailtrap is by going in here, selecting Laravel, and just copying this and putting it in your .env, and now it'll trap all your email. So now that we have that key set up, we can actually generate the mailable. So if we go into our terminal and just use PHP artisan make mail, let's call it contact form submission. Looks like that's created. So now we can open it. So contact form submission. As you can see here, let me just close this a little bit, maybe increase the font. As you can see here, we have a contact form submission mailable or class that extends the mailable class. It uses the queuable and serializes models traits. We can also opt to use the should queue, and we will, just not yet. We have a constructor, which we're going to use to pass in the contact form we want to send out. And we also have a build method. So this is where we're going to actually construct the email we need. So I guess to start, what we can do is just say we want to pass in a contact. Make sure this is imported, which I just did. And we want to set this contact equal to contact. Now we don't actually have contact defined here, but we will in a second. So contact. And now this is going to be available within our build. What we want to do now is actually send out with a subject. So for now, we'll leave the view because I haven't created a view yet, but let's just pretend that we have the view set up. So let's do, we want to set a subject. In this subject, the subject is the subject line of the email. So what everyone's going to see when the email pops up in their inbox. What I want to do is say new contact form submission, and remember that a contact record has a name on it, so we could just put that in the actual subject to make it stand out. We can also set a reply to. So when the administrator wants to reply to a contact form submission, we want to set the email that they're going to reply to. And so we can set this to, the first parameter I believe is email, and the second one is name. Address and name, yep. So it would be this contact email, this contact name, and we don't actually need anything else. We're just going to create a view. So that's the next thing. We're going to have to create a view. So we can go down to our resources, views, create a convention says to create an emails directory, which I will, and we can call it contact form submission .blade.php. And I'm just going to copy this name here. Oops. It's okay. So this would be emails, contact form submission. You can skip the .blade.php. You don't need that. I have an extension that lets me click into it. Let's see if it works, and it sure does. So we have our view ready. We just have nothing in it. Now I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I don't want to rewrite all of it because this is just HTML and CSS. So I have this prepared on the side here. Basically what this email has is just a table. It shows the ID of the contact if you want to reference the actual database ID, the name of the person contacting, the email, the message, and the submitted at, which is just a created at date. A little bit of styling. It doesn't look pretty, but it will do the job. So what I'm doing is I'm using the contact passed in to just extract whatever data I need. So like I said, ID, name, email, message, created at, and that's all saved on the database record. So we have this set up, and we have our mailable here set up, but we're not actually sending anything. So first, before we send anything, let's go to the contact form here and make sure that it actually works. Just to make sure, I want to show you that the database is in fact empty. If I submit one of these, so david@test.com, this is a test message. Submit. Let's check it out. Okay, we have it. You can see that our message went through, everything is saved, the email is correct. So we just don't get any emails coming in, as you can see here. There's nothing here. So let's implement that. If we go back to our component here, which in your case, if you're not using Livewire, would be a controller method, right where I put the mail comment, I'm going to actually just send out a mail. And so how I'm going to do this is by using the mail class, and you want to import this. This is Illuminate Support Facades Mail. I'm going to set 2, and this is where we use our configuration value, which is mail.notifications recipient, I believe. Let's double check this. Oh, notification recipient. Perfect. And we want to also make sure to actually send the correct email. So this is where we put our email class. This would be contact form submission. You want to make sure to import that too. Let me scroll over. And here, because we're expecting a contact to be passed in, we want to pass in the contact here, but we don't have that variable set up. So let's just, when a contact is created, we want to save it to a variable. And that should work, though there is an error, missing a semicolon. Let me just Shrink the font a little bit so you can see we have a contact being created here. We are mailing to the admin notification recipient we set in our config, and we're sending this mailable here, passing in contact. Now, if I go into the browser here and submit another one, this is an emailed message. Let's set david2@test.com, david2. This should go into the database and the Mailtrap account. Submit. Contact form submitted successfully. Let's check Mailtrap. Oh, looks like it went through. So we can see that it's an ID of 3, david2, david2@test. This is an emailed message, and you get the created at. Let's check our database here to make sure we have it. And looks like we do. So as of right now, the email sends out and the record is created. Actually, in the reverse order, the record is created, then the email sent out. This locally is fine. What you should know is that in production, mails should be queued for the most part. So if you're sending out lots of emails, you definitely want them to have them queued somewhere so they're not executing in line, basically. And that's what we're doing right now. So the easiest way to achieve this is change send to queue. And inside contact form submission, if we open up this class here, you just want to implement should queue, which actually you already had imported by default. So now this will be a queued thing, and it should queue your emails as you're sending them out. If you want to make sure that this is working correctly and actually see the completed and failed queued stuff, you can install Laravel Horizon. But for the purpose of this video, this should suffice. So, and it's also worth mentioning that our test will actually check that this is queued. So let's check that this still works. Let's do david3 @test.com. This is a queued submission. Submit. Looks like it went through. Let's check Mailtrap. Sure did. And this is a queued submission. So that works. Now I want to clean one thing up. What I don't like about this is that we're configuring the mail to inside of the contact form. What if we use this exact line somewhere else? We're going to use the config value in 2 places, and what if this config value changes somewhere? So this is just something like a little bit more, I guess, architectural, you could say. What I like to do is actually just create a model or a method on the contact model where it would be like send notification email. And then we would copy this line, remove it, and inside the contact model, we would create a public function, name it exactly what we called it, so send notification email, and within here, actually send off the notification. So we want to make sure that this is all imported. I believe it already is. So this is the Illuminate Support Facades mail, and this is the app mail contact form submission. The only thing that has to change here is the queue. So the queued mailable, you have to pass in the contact. In the context of the Livewire component, that was just the contact variable. Since we're in the contact model here, we could just pass in this. Now we're going to go back and check that this actually works so we don't go on to writing tests with a broken system. Let's name this David4 @test.com. This is a refactored queued email. Submit. Let's see that it actually goes through. And it sure does. So that's great. And so that's basically how you send emails. Again, notifications, if you're sending to multiple users, it's very similar how it works. It might actually technically be a little bit easier. But if you're just sending contact form submissions to one admin email, this is the way to go. Now, of course, if you had an admin registered on the system, and that admin was marked as an admin and that admin had an email, you could use the notifications class, and then maybe you could also use SMS stuff, different channels. But for the purpose of this tutorial, that's how you send email. Now I'm going to write some tests because I feel like that's pretty interesting. the first thing I'm going to do is actually generate that test class. So let's go ahead and just generate PHP artisan make :test. Let's call it contact form submission test. Okay, so it should be made contact form submission test. So what you see here, let me just close all this up. Contact form submission test. What you see here is just a blank test file. And I usually just like to remove this and generate a fresh test with one of my snippets. The first thing I want to test is that the mail is actually getting the HTML set correctly. And this is a pretty cool way to make sure that your data is set correctly or that your data is set in the first place in your mailable template. And it's awesome when you're working with multiple people because someone can go ahead and just change a template, one of your coworkers, without you knowing, and they didn't know how the mail was designed, and now stuff is broken in production. This keeps it nice and simple. So let's do public function test mailable content. And in here, what I'm going to do is, first of all, actually, we have to create a contact factory. So what I'm going to do is just generate that PHP artisan make factory contact factory. If you're unfamiliar with factories, they just basically create records on your behalf. Makes it very easy to generate records for testing. And as you can see, because I named it contact factory, it also already created the class here for me, or set it for me correctly. And what I'm going to do down here is just set the attributes I want. So the first thing I want is name. We can use faker, so this faker name. Email, we could use this faker email. And message, we could use a lorem ipsum text. I'm not going to use a random generator. I prefer just to use lorem ipsum. So let's paste that in here. And so that should be done. Now, this automatically works because, models come with the has factory trait by default now. Something to also do before we start writing the test is to use refresh database. This will refresh the database or remove records that were created between each test, making sure that each test works without any weird leftover stale data. So first thing I want to do is create a contact. So contact, and now we could use our fancy new factory, contact factory create, which will generate with a random name, random email, the text we set, and timestamps. Let's make sure that this is actually imported. Use app models contact. And so now that we have our contact here, we could actually just generate our mailable. So let's call this, or let's do new contact form submission, use app mail contact form submission, make sure that's imported. And if you remember, we have to pass in the contact. So we have our mailable, and now very easy. The mailable has an assert C in HTML contact name. So this is asserting that the contact name is in the HTML of the mailable. We're going to copy this 4 times and just replace this email, message, created at. Now, if I run this test, I have hotkeys set up in VS Code. If you're interested in how this works, I have a video on VS Code on my channel, how I set it up. It's using Caleb Porzio's VS Code extension. So if you are interested, I would highly recommend checking it out. So if I run this one test here in terminal, it'll pass because those values are actually set in the HTML of the mailable. So that's one test down. Let's actually create another one. And this one's going to test that we're actually queuing the mailable. So this one is the interesting one. Let's go ahead and call it contact submission mail is queued. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we're faking the mail. So we're not actually sending it. We're just going to check that it's queued. And you want to make sure that this is actually imported. Let's see what the import is. So that would be use illuminate support facades mail. The next thing we want to do is, in our case, I'm going to use a Livewire test just to set the data. You'd actually probably be posting a form to a controller. But in this example here, using the Livewire example, I'm going to write a Livewire test, which is relatively simple, but not the same. So I'm going to test the contact form Livewire component. And what I'm going to do is set all the data I need. So that would be name, email, message. And then I'm going to call the submit form method that actually submits the form on the component. Let me actually show you that so we're not getting confused. Oops. So I'm just going to set this data here in the test and then call the submit form test just to submit the data. So the first thing I'm going to do is set name, and we could just set this to test name. Let's make this email equal to test@email.com. And let's make the message more of that lorem ipsum text that we set in our content factory, or contact factory rather. So we grab this, set that in here. So now when we call submit form here, what should happen is a contact record should be created, and we will actually test that that's the case. Let me increase my font once again. So I want to use this assert database count to make sure that one contact was created. That's on the contacts table and just one record. I'm going to run this test and see that that's the case, and it is. So let's also assert that the correct record was created. So this assert database has contacts, and the second parameter of this is the actual data. So in this case, it would be name, test name, email, test@email.com, message, and that would be our lorem ipsum text. Let's make sure this actually works. And it does, that's cool. So basically what we've proven here is that we could submit our Livewire component submit form method. It'll actually create the contact form record, and it will presumably queue the mail that we wanted to send. Now we don't have proof that it's actually been queued. So what I'm going to do now is just make sure that that queue actually happened. So the first thing I want to do is actually get the contact record that we created. We know that only one is there, so it's safe to just take the first one. And now we could actually mail, let me scroll up a little bit, mail assert queued, and we could assert that the contact form submission mailable was queued, and we could also make sure that it's just one. So let's run this. So one email was queued, that makes sense. And then we could also assert queued contact form submission, and I'm going to pass in a callback or a closure, depending what you call it. Mail, we're going to pass in the mail, and then we're just going to check that the mail, so the mailable, I'll go over this in a second, contact ID is equal to contact ID. Now I know that there's probably a lot to unpack here. I forgot the : class. Basically what's happening here is it's comparing the contact ID here that we created to the contact ID that's set inside the mailable. If we click into the mailable here, remember we were setting this through the constructor. We just want to make sure that the ID of this matches the ID here. So it's this exact contact record that was passed in. Let's run the test and see if it works, and it does. So that's pretty much it for this video. We queued a mail, sent it, tested it. You can see that it works in both Mailtrap and my database. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, the link to the previous video is in the description below. The link to Cloudways is below if you want to help out the channel and you need a host. I highly recommend it. And please do let me know what you thought of the video below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.